Hey everyone, it's been an incredibly busy week for the Season of Mastery in Classic World of Warcraft. There have been three pretty substantial articles and announcements that have come out. So I just wanted to quickly go through all of them because it's just been a ton of different information that's pretty relevant to anybody that's currently playing Season of Mastery or that was thinking about it and wasn't quite sure. So the first and probably the most substantial announcement is that Blackwing Lair is going to be coming out on February 10th. This is something that we probably anticipated, though it is a lot sooner than we thought. That's only 8 days away from this post. There are some pretty substantial changes to Blackwing Lair. Each of the bosses has new mechanics, so things like Razor Gore having a giant chromatic spawn out of an egg in the middle of the fight. Veilstraz having more HP and changes to a burning adrenaline. Firemaw is electrifying. Flamegore and Ebonrock are now tag teaming the raid group. Chromagus is just a giant RNG cluster of a fight. And Nefarian, though basically the same, has a couple different adjustments. Blackwing Lair coming out should be quite entertaining for anyone that's still playing and still raiding in Season of Mastery. And even with those few changes, there are some additional things that are happening with Season of Mastery. So as of yesterday, this blue post came out with changes that cover all of Season of Mastery, including the release of Blackwing Lair. So a couple big things that are affecting all the raids that are currently available in Season of Mastery is that they are going to increase the amount of loot dropping off of Onyxia, the bosses in Molten Core, and Blackwing Lair once it gets released. So they're increasing that by one item per boss. Now I think that's mostly in an effort to help the guilds that are already playing sort of catch up. One of the big factors with Season of Mastery is that super fast cadence release of content, and that means that players are typically not going to be full bis from one phase going into the next. And I think that there was a lot of feedback about the lack of loot that you're going to actually be able to get out of these early raids to make it possible to clear those later raids, especially without world buffs. So they're increasing the loot drops on each boss, at least through Blackwing Lair. Some other changes that they're doing is that they are having certain professions, specifically alchemists, have chances to proc additional potions, elixirs, and flasks. So if you think about how it works in TBC, I think it's going to be very similar. You are a 300 alchemist. When you are creating potions, elixirs, and flasks, you're just going to have a chance to create additional of those items when you're crafting. Again, I think that this is it's to help mitigate that time and effort and maybe a barrier to entry to raiding. And then probably the most substantial of all the changes is that they are going to increase the Season of Mastery quest experience buff from 40% to 100%. So right now, if you go on the PTR for Classic Era for Season of Mastery, this Adventure Awaits buff, which every character in Season of Mastery has, is showing the change that they are planning on implementing. So they're going to go from 40% increased experience from quests to 100%. The original buff that we had in Season of Mastery was a 40% increase in normal quests, and then a 100% increase in dungeon and elite quests. Now we're not quite sure if they're also going to increase the dungeon and elite quests to be more than 100% once this change goes live. But from what we have seen and what I have talked to from different people, this could increase the leveling rates by quite a bit. So many people that have already leveled 1 to 60 in Season of Mastery, that 40% increase in quest XP, it seemed like it increased overall leveling time by about 20%. So if you're someone who took 10 days to level to 60 in Original Classic, with that 40% increase XP, it seemed like you were taking about 8 days, so 20% faster. The early testing that people have started doing on the PTR with this 100% XP change seems like it may cut that 1 to 60 time as much as 50% and maybe even more. So if you're someone who took 10 days to level in Classic when it first came out back in 2019, if you level at the same general play style and pace, it may only take you 5 days. And that means that some of those super fast levelers that got done in 6 days or less played, they could be getting level 60 characters leveled up in Season of Mastery in as little as 3 days, maybe even less. This is a pretty huge change, and I think that the goal of most of these changes, the increased loot dropping in raids, the chance to proc additional consumables, the increased leveling rates. I think these things are all meant to try to bring more people into Season of Mastery. If you look at the populations that are currently playing in Classic TBC versus Classic Season of Mastery, the one metric we have to look at is raids logged. So the most recent data from Ironforge Pro is that there were around 10,000 active raiders in Season of Mastery. When you compare that to TBC, TBC has over 300,000 active raiding characters. Now, there's differences there between people raiding on multiple characters in TBC versus people still probably gearing up and prepping to raid in Season of Mastery. But that's still a very substantial difference, and I think that a lot of the changes that we're seeing here are an effort from Blizzard to drive new players or bring new players into Season of Mastery by lowering these barrier to entry, right? They're trying to make it so that it's easier to level, so that it's easier to gear, and that it's easier to get consumables so that you can get straight into that in-game content. Now, the other piece of information that came out recently was this interview with Brian Birmingham on the Classic Season of Mastery. Now, he's the lead software engineer for World of Warcraft Classic, and during this interview that you can find on Wowhead, he talks about what their plans were for Season of Mastery and the types of players that they were trying to create the server for. And it seems like their goal with Season of Mastery was to appease the Classic Plus crowd. They were trying to get players that were interested in vanilla WoW and specifically in, creating more difficult content in vanilla WoW. They're trying to bring them back and have them play in Season of Mastery. It's tough to know whether or not it's actually working. I think that a lot of the people that would be interested in sort of a Classic Plus are still playing TBC. So it could just be an issue with timing. It could also be that players weren't necessarily all that interested in playing, just buffed raid content. It kind of remains to be seen whether or not this seasonal vanilla server thing can work. It's going to, I think, very much depend on what is happening with other Classic realms and expansions. If TBC is going to continue to draw as many players as it is, then the seasonal vanilla servers may never end up being as popular as the original Classic release. And then the same thing may happen once they release Classic Wrath of the Lich King, where you're not going to see that many players participating on these vanilla servers. But all of that is just speculation. We're not quite sure. They hinted at, or Brian hinted at, this idea that they could potentially do some sort of Classic Plus with actual new content within World of Warcraft Classic somewhere down the line. But he didn't give any details on it, so we don't know if that will ever actually happen. But I think that if they do really want new players to come to try out Classic Vanilla in the World of Warcraft Classic game, they are going to have to do something like that. I think that the majority of this news only really affects players that are already playing on Season of Mastery. I think it's hard to say whether or not this is going to attract any new players to come and play, because we're already almost into what would be Phase 3. Even with the faster leveling rates, even with more gear dropping off of bosses, even with it being easier to craft and farm consumables, I think that it may already be too far in for Season of Mastery to really start gaining more new players. So these changes are interesting because I think that for the most part they are only affecting players that were already playing on Season. This change for loot dropping is going to help guilds that were planning on being here for the long haul. The increased proc chance on alchemy crafting is also going to help those players. But this change in XP rate, I think, is very much geared towards trying to bring in new players, and I don't know how much it's going to do. All of this to say that they at least are trying different things. They're trying to bring in new players. They're trying to listen to the people that are actively playing Season of Mastery and who are actively playing Classic World of Warcraft. I think that it's a good sign overall that they are continuing to try to listen to the community and make changes that the community seems to be asking for. My personal opinion is that the more they do these things, the more they change rates of leveling and they adjust the way that professions work and they change the raid content, the more we are going to go down a path that I think private vanilla WoW servers went down 5 or 6 years ago, which is focusing on the in-game content. And as you do that, and as you make the leveling portion, the 1 to 60, and the professions and everything, as you make those easier and easier, and you lower the barrier to entry, I think that ends up trivializing the game to a certain extent, and you're honestly gonna kind of lose players. This is what happened on private servers. You had a lot of servers with increased experience rates, increased profession rates, and over time, what ended up happening was the servers that went closer and closer and tried to get that original vanilla feel, like Nostalrius did, like Chronos did, those servers ended up being the most popular. And the reason is that part of what makes vanilla so good, in my opinion, is that grind. So we'll see what happens with Season of Mastery. I know that there are still quite a few players that are interested in it. I know that I personally like the fact that the raids are getting more difficult, but I don't think they're going to be able to bring in new players with these changes. I think what we're seeing with Season of Mastery is that this entire year-long project that they're doing is kind of one big beta test for what they're going to do in the future. I think that they're trying to figure out, is there a way to continually bring in vanilla WoW players, whether it's the same people that we're playing or new people. And my hope is that they find out over time that the players who are going to continually play Season of Mastery or whatever vanilla seasons there are players that just want to play vanilla WoW, and they don't necessarily want or even need all these different changes. But you may disagree with me, and if that is the case, feel free to leave comments below and state your own opinion. I know that there are people that love what they're doing, there's people who hate what they're doing, and I think that it's just great that we're getting to see the Classic WoW team try out these different things, because otherwise we as players may never know what we truly like or what we don't like. Thank you for watching. I hope that this was helpful. If you are looking for more Classic WoW Season Mastery news, or you're looking for boss guides or anything else, hit the subscribe button, come back, see what I'm up to, or check me out on stream as I continue to play within Season of Mastery. Have a good one, and as always, happy hunting.